Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Marine Science in the Morning 2005. I'm very pleased and excited to introduce Dr. Cortney Ohs from the University of Florida, IFAS. And Dr. Ohs can tell us what IFAS exactly is. And the title of this talk is, I'll let him introduce this talk.
So this is, I'm going to give you an introduction to aquaculture, and I'm going to cover lots of different topics of aquaculture. We'll go over some worldwide statistics and Florida statistics, and I'll show you what this looks like and what aquaculture does to benefit the world. So IFAS is the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It's the largest agricultural division of any university in the country, and it's based upon that whole division of the University of Florida is for agriculture. And we address agricultural research for the whole state. Well, Gainesville can't do that, so they put research and education centers all around the state. I'll show you a picture of some of those, and we address the local agricultural needs. And aquaculture is agriculture. Aquaculture is farming, so that's why I'm located here in Fort Pierce. And because there's a lot of aquaculture here, so I help serve the industry that's local here. So, as I said, we'll go over introduction to aquaculture in the U.S. and the world, and we will discuss how Florida and U.S. aquaculture contributes to world aquaculture. We'll go over all different types of aquaculture compared to fisheries. And I'm going to tell you about several of the labs at UF and all of the diverse aquaculture projects that we work on statewide. These are some of the examples of some marine ornamentals that we work with, but lots of other species. So, what is aquaculture? So, the first definition is the art of cultivating the natural produce of water. Another one is farming of aquatic organisms in natural and controlled marine and freshwater environments. The next one is husbandry of organisms in an aquatic ecosystem. Another is rearing of aquatic organisms under a controlled or semi-controlled conditions. So we have all of these. It's definitely an art, some of this. There is agriculture, it's farming, it's your husbandry, and you're doing this in a very controlled environment, the diets and the water quality and everything to keep them, the aquatic organisms happy and thriving. Sometimes you see the word mariculture. It's not used very much anymore. It's an older word, but it's basically marine aquaculture. So it's very diverse. There's people who have to be experts in all these different topics. Biology, ecology, you have to know something about nutrition. You have to know how to handle and haul these fish. Water quality is critical. You have to be able to identify and take care of the diseases that they may have. You have to be able to sell your product if you want to make money. Each one of these species of fish have slightly different culture techniques. One doesn't work for all. So especially within the marine realm. And you are going to be seeing some systems, and you have to have somebody who's an engineer. So this is not just one of these topics, it's all of these put together, and it takes expertise in all of it to pull off an aquaculture farm. So why aquaculture? First of all, it's sustainable, and we're not over harvesting from the natural waters of the world. Lots of farms will have typical agriculture, and they have ponds or water sources, and then they raise also fish. So they're actually diversifying their income within that farm by raising fish in addition to whatever their other agricultural projects. And we control their environment, food, and the quality of the product. People want to know where their seafood comes from. Several years ago, the government mandated that all stores use what's called COOL, which is a country of origin label. You can go to Publix, you can go to Sam's Club, wherever you go, even the fresh seafood, you will see it's farm raised from somewhere or it's wild caught. And if you usually say where it's wild caught from, if it's not there, I bet you ask the person behind the counter and they will quickly tell you what it is because they're supposed to have it all labeled because people care where their food is coming from. So that has really contributed to identifying aquaculture and how large it is. So aquaculture has grown at about 6.9% annually for about, and it's doubled in the last 15 years. Okay, so it's a very quick growing type of agriculture. It's the fastest growing animal food production sector in all of the world agriculture. So I pose a question, and I've been asking this question for a long time, and I get a wide range of answers. So think about all the seafood that's consumed. The oceans cover about 70, or the waters covers about 70% of the earth. What percent of all the seafood that we consume today comes from aquaculture? Any guesses? What's that?
30.
30. Another guess? 10%. 10%. Okay.
65.
65. We have a wide range. All right. So a long time ago, everybody was saying 10% or 10%, 20%, or something low. The country of origin labeling of the products that you're seeing in the grocery stores actually has probably increased awareness of aquaculture. And the real number is 52%. So think about that. That's pretty impressive. More than half of the seafood consumed in the entire world is farm raised today. Okay? That's a lot when 70% of the world is covered in water. So you think about that. So this is the catch. I'm going to show you a graph in a second, but as this increases, it's estimated by 2050 that it's going to have to be 75% if the oceans stay the same. And here's a graphic. So you see here, blue is the wild-caught fisheries of freshwater and marine. And you see since about 1980, it's somewhere around 80 million metric tons. And it hasn't changed much. It goes up and down. Is it going to grow in the next 20 years? Do you think we're going to be able to take more fish from the ocean than we are right now? I don't have that answer, but I would say I would worry if we were trying to do that. So in order to get the seafood level that we need more of aquaculture. And you see this large growth that's occurring. And this is 52%, and this is 48% here in the blue. So if we're going to hit 75% in the next years, think of what this graph has to do. The red has to continue to go up. Aquaculture has to go up the same, and this has to stay the same, the wild caught. Okay? It's very important that we continue to expand aquaculture. This kind of gives you a quick thing of all the different species, and it's not so much that you have to look at all this in the details, but you see that they're all increasing, and so all of the divisions of aquaculture are increasing. So where does it occur? We're looking at 66, 2/3 of it is by quantity is in China, 22% is in Pacific and Asia, and 10.5% is in the rest of the world, Europe, Latin America, the United States, and others. Okay, we do a lot of the research for aquaculture that's used in other places in the world. By value, these countries, these regions are a lot higher because they're selling the product for more dollars than they are somewhere else. So it's still, the majority of it is produced in other places, and we do a lot of the research here in the United States. This is 2018, and it's a little outdated, and I can't find a new graph, and I didn't have time or tape map, and I didn't get to show you, but this gives you an idea where it is. The darker the blue, the more they produce. Washington does salmon, lots of different bivalves, large production there. All of this is probably catfish, mostly, hybrid striped bass and others. There is a large amount of, Texas is very diverse in lots of different species that they produce, especially in ponds, both marine and freshwater. Louisiana, a lot of crawfish. And Florida is now 165 million this year. They do the census of aquaculture, which is within the census of agriculture by the USDA every 5 years. And they just put the new numbers out, and we're at 165 million. So we are dark blue, even though it's one shade less in the 2018 map. And this is what we produce here in Florida. Okay. There's not a lot of food fish. There's some, but it's not the dominant one. Mollusk is very large for, this is clams and oysters. This is a great food product that is raised all over in Florida. We have some crustaceans, shrimp. There's lots of shrimp farms around, but they don't produce a lot of food shrimp around here, but they produce little babies, and we can talk about that later. The miscellaneous is the alligators and the turtles and all of the other things that they do, and they do a lot of aquaculture of those. So I work within this ornamental fish group, and there's marine and freshwater here. And so you look at it by value, it's the largest in Florida. So we're selling a lot of very small fish for a premium price, and it's not our food fish, but it's going into aquariums, and we'll talk a lot about several of these. So here's a map of Florida. And there's aquaculture all over. There's only a couple white counties, okay? They probably don't have very good water resources or soil proper for compared to others. Oops. You have right here, that's Cedar Key, okay? There is a huge number of clam and oyster farms, mostly clams. And that is the heart of the clam industry. In the last few years, we will now see this probably be dark blue on the new one, because there's a lot of oyster farms up there, okay? So there's a lot of expansion. You see there's aquaculture all over the state of Florida. All right, some quick food ones. Tilapia. 20 years ago, you couldn't get tilapia. Now you see tilapia everywhere. People like it or people don't like it. It's actually a very good, what we call a generic white meat that is a very good food product. For the world, this is huge. It's an important protein source for the world. Okay, it's easy to raise, and it is a very valuable food source for the world. Catfish, the markets are strong. There's been in the United States, it was in Mississippi, Alabama, it was all raised there, and now there's a lot of competition from imports from other countries. Hybrid striped bass is a common one. People maybe don't know what that is. There's a picture of one right there. It's between a striped bass and a white bass hybrid, and they grow very well. And there's been a lot of research on them, and the markets are pretty big. It's not that identifiable by a lot of markets, but it is a very commonly cultured fish and a very good food product. Those were freshwater. These are marine. So these are the main ones, but there's lots of others. The Florida pompano is a big product, and there is several farms, and there's one right here in Fort Pierce. You might not know. That's the website. If you want to check out a cool video, go to Aquaculture and look it up. There is it's indoors. It's 2 miles from here, and I think they raise 500,000 pounds of pompano indoors per year. So, and they want to continue to expand. So that's a good one. Black sea bass has had a lot of production along the East Coast. Doesn't grow fast, but it's a premium product. And so there's quite a few along the Atlantic coast. Cobia, it's kind of all over the world. This is common now in a lot of these open ocean cages that I'll show you pictures of. And then flounder. There's been a lot of work with flounder. There's several native flounder that work. There's actually one of them, an olive flounder from Asia, that is emerging as one of the best aquacultured ones in most of the world, and they raise it some here in Florida as well, and keep it away from being released into the wild from here. But anyway, it's not native here, but it's one that's very tuned to aquaculture methods. We have bait fish. We have freshwater bait fish. You have golden shiners used for largemouth bass fishing all over. Most of them are raised in Arkansas, and they come down in live haul semi trucks on a daily basis to come to Florida, and they come and make a loop and sell them all, and they go straight back and get another one and come back the next day. They sell them here. There is maybe between 5 and 10 producers here in the state, and the rest of them all come from Arkansas. So, and then you might think those are goldfish, but those are rosy fathead minnows, and those are mostly raised in Arkansas and sent all over as freshwater bait through the entire United States. There is in the fundulus family, many of them. There's several of them right out here. and an aquarium. You can see this is one of them. They are very brackish or salt or fresh, and you can acclimate them to either one, and they are good bait. I started work many years ago, and the first thing I had to do, I did work on was pinfish and pigfish. We've also worked with Kroger, and we did a lot of research for many years defining how to do this. And so all of these are available through bait stores, and there could be a huge expansion. There's a lot of money potential for producers in different regions of the state. And there's Live Advantage Bait right here in Fort Pierce, a pretty large company, and they are raising pinfish and produce. So there's lots of different crustaceans raised. This is the typical marine shrimp. It's called a Panea shrimp. This is my hand. This is giant Malaysian freshwater prawns, and my hand with 3 shrimp tails on it. They get big. And you can see those in like Sam's Club and Publix sometimes. In different stores you can get them. They're a delicious product. You have all kinds of crabs. You have crawfish. Big markets in the South. Most of them are from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. And then you have little tiny ones like brine shrimp. Everybody knows these as potentially sea monkeys. And they're very important food for aquaculture when they're babies and when they're adults. Several large companies here in Florida. And then copepods, we'll talk more about those. So this is shrimp production. This is in Fellsmere, 40 miles north. There's the largest pole barn in the world, okay? And I think there's 2 of them that have plans for 4 of them. So look at this. It's huge. It's the size of 4 football fields, including the insects. 1 building. See the person walking right there? You see that little dot right in the middle there? That's a human walking down there, and how far away they are. It gives you the size and the scale of it. Very intensive production. They use what's called biofloc. I won't get into that. Highly automated, and this is what the water looks like, and the shrimp thrive in there. And this is indoor shrimp production all over the world uses this biofloc method. All right. So let's talk about mollusks. It's the largest food use aquaculture in the state. Hard clams they dominate, and there is also oysters, and there's a new product. It's not new, but it's new to aquaculture. Probably the last 5 years, it's really expanded, and that's called the Sunray Venus clam. They just take a different type of sediment. Beautiful, great product, delicious. There's at least 720 growers. They lease a bottom of a shallow water from the state. They get little squares, and that's where they can put their bags to raise the clams. And the state regulates it, and they put those in different places. And here's a picture of that. So here's clams in a bag that they're harvesting. Oops, sorry. That they're harvesting. And they take those bags. This guy's lifting a bag off the bottom. He's standing on there, so it's this deep. And they take those bags and they're staked in place. And they take them about monthly, and they clean them, shake them, rotate them, and then they eventually, when they get large enough, they bring them in and they clean them up, and that's the product that goes to market. Delicious and very sustainable, great aquaculture product. Oysters. Many years ago, Apalachicola Bay was where the majority of them were wild harvested. And Georgia suspended the discharge of the fresh water, and Atlanta started eating the fresh water. So they went to hypersaline conditions and caused some problems with the oysters there. And so there was issues with that. There was legalities between the states because they caused all kinds of problems. Anyway, so they have recovered. They have done a lot of planting of new oysters to replant them so they can increase the natural ones. But they've also gone to these floating plastic mesh containers full of the oysters. And so this shows you a typical operation of what it looks like. There's actually a couple of them in Indian River Lagoon. If you ride a boat between here and Sebastian Inlet, you'll go by a couple of these commercial operations. So world aquaculture looks very diverse everywhere. You see somewhere in Asia, these ponds, probably mangroves on them. That it's very rarely occurs anymore. The World Aquaculture Association and others have really made sure that there wasn't damage to the mangroves in a lot of the areas. If you might hear something about that, that's 25, 30 years ago, and it really is regulated where we're not damaging mangroves anymore in aquaculture. I'll show you more of these. This is an open ocean aquaculture cage. And this is, I believe, a tilapia farm in the Midwest. It's like Illinois, is where it is. Okay, it's indoors. Every one of these filters is 4 to 6 foot wide and 8 to 9 feet tall. They're huge. And each one of those filters is controlling 1 or 2 tanks right next to it. And look at the size of this production facility. Okay. What's that?
I'm sorry, they need a solar plant.
They do, yeah. So anyway, this is a warm water fish being raised in the Midwest, indoors. So there's open ocean aquaculture. So there's lots of different types. The one on the top left is called a spar, and you see a human on one. And that center metal pipe is about this big around, and the bottom has a hole in it, and the rest of it's sealed. And they pump it full of air, and it goes to the surface. Then they inject water and replace that air, and it sinks back down. There's hoses hooked up to it. A boat comes up and pumps pelleted feed down into it, and they feed it at a regular rate where all these fish can consume. There's many species worldwide raised. Cobia is one of them. There is legalities within the United States, and there's lots of battles with NGOs about where you could put these and that type of thing. And so they have occurred in Maine, they have occurred in Hawaii, and a lot of the other operations have moved to other countries that don't have the same regulations. Panama is a huge one, a large number of these spar operations and raised cobia. So these are a little different. There's different names, different sizes. Some call them like a geodesic ball or all kinds of different, but they're a cage. And so they do the same thing. They float up and they control the depth of them, but they don't have that spar in the middle. But every one of these pipes is hollow plastic, very strong, rigid, and they pump those inside of all those pipes full of air and it raises it to the surface. And then they flood that back out of the water and they throw it back down. So this is a common oyster culture in a place where there's high tidal activity. Okay, so this is low tide, and the guy's out here making sure everything's right. And a few hours later, the tide comes back up. The oysters have closed up; they're fine with the low tide, and then they come in with the tide again. So this occurs in many different places in the world using the tidal. Mussels, green-lipped mussels. Classic comes from New Zealand. Now they raise them all over the Pacific, but they're delicious. We can get them locally, and the initial aquaculture of them was New Zealand, and now it's expanded all over through the Pacific. Abalone, very expensive product. Mostly goes to Asian markets, Japan especially, and very high dollar, and it eats a lot of kelp, and so it takes a lot of algae in order for it to grow. Big dollars. There's operations in Baja, Mexico, tens of millions of dollars per year of abalone. Basically, you can think of it as a little one shell, like a snail, it's almost, but not exactly. It's a delicious product and very high value. And then urchins. So salmon. Salmon aquaculture occurs lots of places. Norway was kind of the one that really took it to the large level, and initially, and you see these large cages, different shapes. They locate these in high tidal areas, so there is an accumulation of waste, and it doesn't hurt the water quality in that area. So there's these huge tidal areas coming in and out each day, and so all of the potential nutrients left over are all flushed, and it doesn't cause any kind of problems. They can locate these in deep water. They can locate them away from land sometimes, and you can see that it's a house floating there where the staff lives there the whole time. Some of these these type of cages have been off shore and caught in like an eddy of a country where they just like the water in the ocean off the west coast of Australia, as an example, and it just sits there and it moves within the current all the time. The whole unit together, people live there, and they raise fish in those facilities. This is a common way of raising salmon. There's a very large salmon farm in Florida, indoors, if you didn't know that. It's in Homestead. And the goal is to have like 5 million pounds of salmon. And they are one day to put it on a plate in a restaurant. When it comes from Norway, it's 2 or 3 days. And it's always a fresh product, and they bring it in. It's flown here and then it's distributed. So it's 2 or 3 days till it hits your plate. But it's done and very rarely frozen, because the fresh product brings $4 more profit. All right, so there's lots of different ponds. What do you think of this? You think you can grow some fish there? A bunch of weeds? I'll say no. This is a mess. I get someone calls me up and says, "Hey, I got this pond. Send me a picture of this one." And I can't do it. Sorry. This is more of an aquaculture ponds. Lots of different colors because they're different algae. Each one is a different ecosystem, and it changes over time. Nothing wrong with that. This is those rectangle ones are probably between 5 and 10 acres in size. This is common for catfish. This is common for hybrid striped bass. This is common for shrimp, and they do this all over the world. And you can see perfect use of all of the land. They're not wasting the land on that agricultural piece of land. They're able to maintain the water. They're not deep. They're not any deeper than I am tall. And usually they slope towards the drain, and so one side's deeper than the other. And another reason is they go along with a tractor and a big blower that takes pelleted feed, and they shoot it out. And so they're able to go down the 2 sides, and they would shoot, so food would go on this side of it, and then they take a tractor over here, and it would go here. Or they use the wind, and they put it in one place and let the wind carry it across, depending on the day and how it's going to happen. So a tractor with big pipes blowing hundreds of pounds of feed into these and feeding these fish in these systems, and shrimp or whatever it may be. Sometimes it doesn't hold water, and you have to line it. It makes it more expensive. Regions of Florida need line. You have to aerate them. These are paddle wheel aerators, and they turn on. Oftentimes they're automated, and other times they just turn them on at night. During the day, there's plenty of oxygen production from the sun, and it goes down, and the lowest oxygen is always at sunrise. So it's the longest time since sun input has occurred. And so they have to make sure that someone's there all night, making sure the oxygen is there, and they turn these on. So sometimes it's automated. So this is an in-pond raceway. This is another one. You can see here how this one is about 6 feet wide, about 20 feet long, and another 6 feet deep. You can raise thousands of pounds of fish within that in a little confined area. Okay, so here's another operation, and protecting it from predators like birds. All right, I told you about abalone. They raise kelp for it. There's lots of different algae that are used for different products. It's in our makeup. It's in a lot of our food products and lotions and that type of thing. There's all sorts of algae products that we use for humans. Corals, we have some of them out here. Sometimes they extract different compounds that are medicinal out of them, and they're using the aquarium trade and live rock for the aquarium. So lots of live rock operations start with blank coral rock and are put out in the ocean or put in a controlled tank, and then all of the pink coral and algae that you see in the aquarium out here then colonize it, and then they sell that to an aquarium at a premium price. Dacnid clams is another one, and all sorts of shrimps and snails. There's endless plants. Florida is huge in plant production. Okay, it's dwarfed compared to the size of all the food industries, but these are great because these freshwater plants and marine ones live here year round, and they sell them to all the people with little backyard ponds up north, and then they die in the winter, and we sell them the next year. So we have a lock on that market because we have tropical temperatures. So this is University of Florida. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do in a couple other labs. I'm not just trying to promo, but I'm just doing what we do in the labs. And Harbor Branch is nearby. They do a lot of aquaculture. And so I'm not trying to take the limelight here, but I'm just going to show you. So I told you the University of Florida, this is the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. We have research in the entire state, and you see all the different places that there are. The red are almost in every county. It's an extension office. It's for the University of Florida staff to educate the public and educate producers on all these different topics in agriculture. Then you have Vero Beach and Fort Pierce. Those are research and education centers. Mine is out on Kings Highway. It's the Indian River Research and Education Center. There's about 16 faculty. I think we're from 9 different departments. Do everything from citrus to row crops to citrus diseases, mangroves, coastal stuff, and aquaculture. And so I developed an aquaculture lab there. This is another large lab in Ruskin, and it is where all the freshwater ornamental aquaculture. I'll show you some pictures, and there's another one right nearby that also does aquaculture. So this is my lab, quick pictorial. Have some lion ponds. We have a greenhouse full of all different types of systems. This is 10,000 square foot building. We have all different types of broodstock systems. We raise different species of fish. A lot of these need algae, so we have an algae room, and we have microalgae in there. These are some of the larval tanks where we do experiments on these little tiny fish, and we define how to raise each one of these. And I'll show you some of those. So, and we produce copepods, all right? And so, 15 years ago, that everything cultured was done with rotifers and brine shrimp, which is sea monkeys. Those are the 2 common live food organisms that were used. And if you were culturing a marine fish, it was with those 2 products, those 2 live organisms. And they weren't perfect. They were, but they're not perfect. Anyway, but copepod ends up being perfectly nutritious, super common in the ocean. There's at least 12,000 known species. They're all over right out here. They bloom at different temperatures and salinities over all these different species in their blooms. So within the ocean, there's fish that spawn at certain times that are associated with a bloom of a certain type of copepod in that region. Okay, so it's very dialed in. Now it's being affected possibly by humans and other things, but that is how dialed in some of the spawning events were for a particular bloom and a temperature for those copepods of those 12,000 different species. So in aquaculture, worldwide, we know how to raise 10 to 20 different species of copepod. My lab has worked with 3 of them. But what it's done is it's opened up the abilities to raise a bunch of marine ornamentals because they have tiny mouths and they wouldn't live on rotifers and martini. So right now, I meant to put it in one more slide. But the reason for ornamental aquaculture, currently 90% of freshwater ornamentals are farm raised that are sold worldwide. And Florida's huge in freshwater ornamental aquaculture. And so the majority of them are raised in Florida. They're exported to other countries in Europe and everywhere else for aquariums. And 90% of the species are farm raised that are in the aquarium. Now, it's vice versa for the marine ones. 10% or less are cultured, and all the rest are wild caught. Okay? So all of those fish are taken from a reef somewhere else and transported across the world and come here to a pet store and then make it to an aquarium. So that's a difficult path for some of those wild fish. And so to be more sustainable, we need to be able to raise these fish in a local area and sustainably in aquaculture versus taking multiple ones off of the reef to get some percentage of them to survive to get to a home aquarium. So it's a rough ride to come from Indonesia and be in a box with oxygen and come here to a pet store and somewhere else. And so you do not get 100% survival in that. And so if you're culturing these locally, then you're giving a quality product that's used to an aquarium and will live longer. And so that's one of the goals of our lab, is that there's a very large marine ornamental producers here. There's many within the state. 2 of the largest in the whole country are within a few miles of us here. And so I do a lot of work to help that agricultural industry locally. And we are looking to diversify the number of species they are able to raise. Okay, they can't raise them all, but they're very good at some of them, like clownfish, like Nemo. And so they're trying to raise different species, and that's where we come in. And the key was that little crustacean, that copepod that I talked about, is giving them this perfect diet in order to raise these. So this, I'll just go through a few of them that we've raised. This is a reef butterfly fish from the Caribbean. No one had ever raised it before, and this gives you kind of an idea of what you have to feed them. The first few days they get algae, you give them rotifers just to give them something easy to eat. You give them copepods, and after a point in time, after 30 or 40 days, you can give them that brine shrimp and a dry diet. It transitions. This is a rotifer, and this is a tiny copepod. This is an adult copepod. This is way too large to eat. This is much smaller. It's something like 30 microns wide. 30 microns wide. So I'm going to show you something here. This gives you an idea of the size. Oh, it's all dirty. Do you see the fish in there versus the debris?
Okay.
I changed it. I got some debris and I changed it yesterday. You see the little tiny fish? See anything? Yes. Tiny? Okay. Gives you an idea of what size organism we're dealing with on these marine ornamentals. Now, this is very similar to a grouper larvae, say food fishes, not much larger than that. And I can pass it around if you all want to look at it. This is a little bit larger. This is a pigfish, but this is about the size of a grouper if you all want to shine the light and do that. I'll keep on talking and you all can look at that. Gives you the size of an organism that we're having to feed. So think how small that live food organism has to be to go in the mouth of that. Okay, and it has to be perfect nutrition. So that's where copepods are key. All right, this is what it looks like. And we photographed it in different developmental stages, and we are able to produce. This is another Caribbean species we work with, and we're very successful raising it. They're a hogfish. They're like the big Maximus hogfish that people spearfish in the Keys. We've worked with that one, and we're successful raising that as well. They're sex change. They don't, they're sequential protogynous hermaphrodites. What's that mean? They end as a male. They all start as a female, and some of them end as a male. Okay, they end their life as a male, but a hogfish is haremic. Okay, so they're in a harem. There's a dominant male, and there is a subordinate male, and then all females. And that big, huge male, if something happens to it, then the subordinate male will become the male, and another female will start transitioning into a male. It takes several months to do this, but they're maintained in a harem. In the Keys, you have those big hogfish that are spearfished. You take the male out, you just messed up the spawning harem of up to 12 fish for a long period of time. I'll show you a picture of one of those. But this is a smaller fish, and this is the same thing. It's still a hogfish because of its reproductive pattern that it has. And this is what it looks like at different stages. And you have tiny 5-day-old, and you see by 20 days, it's starting to look like a fish in development. So you can get coloration by 77 days. This is a banded butterfly fish. This is also from the Caribbean. Lots of different developmental stages. You see some eggs with oddly more than one lipid droplet. You see when they come out, they don't have a mouth and they don't have eyes. They have no digestive tract. This is a yolk. This is the yolk right here, the egg yolk that is there, and this is an oil droplet. Okay? The first thing it does is it absorbs that yolk and it uses that energy to develop an eye and a mouth and its digestive tract grows. So by 2 days, you see the yolk's almost gone, and by 3 days, it has a mouth and eyes. If it doesn't eat that day, it won't make it to day 4. It has to eat that day because it's out of nutrient storage. It uses them within 2 or 3 days. It depends on the species. And so that is when you start feeding them as much live food, copepods, and whatever else you can to get some food in that, and so they can make it to the next stage. And that's what's difficult. In those first one, you're feeding something tiny, you saw them, and you're feeding them a live food, and you have to be able to give them plenty of it, and so they're able to catch it easily. So there is, remember the first one, the definition of aquaculture, there is an art to it. It comes from trial and error. Anyway, so they do develop and make beautiful fish, and it does work. So this is one of them I already know story. So our lab and the other lab in Ruskin, when Finding Nemo came out, there was a huge push for clownfish, and everybody wanted to buy clownfish because that's Nemo. And so the markets went crazy, and they didn't have them produced. But they're really easy to produce compared to other fish. They're a large egg, they're a larger larvae, and they're easy to raise. And so now it's very commonly to raise all of those clownfish. Well, this was coming out, and this is very difficult. And agencies told us that we need to do this because everybody is going to want one of these, and it's going to be too many harvested from the wild. So we set out trying to raise these, and we were successful. It wasn't easy, but both labs did it within 2 weeks of each other, and we were successful. And there is producers in Hawaii now, and Palau, and there has been a couple in the United States. There is one in Florida, and I don't know what the current production is, but they have been raising these. The fish lives a long time, and so once you get happy brood groups, then you're able to get them to spawn. And these guys spawn almost every day in tropical conditions. We have several brood fish that are about this big, and you keep about 6 to 10 of them in a tank, and they spawn every day. They're broadcast spawners. They do a dance and sperm and egg out in the water, and it's fertilized externally. And then we have our system engineered to collect those eggs. So crazy developmental stages here, isn't it? I like all these pictures of where it's going through all these developmental stages. This is a copper-banded butterfly fish. We're still the only one in the world to be able to culture this one successfully. And some of these are ones that we've been successful. This is the hogfish from the Keys. Everybody probably knows that. It's one that they spearfish. And several different species that are important. And these are a few that we just did in the last year. This one hasn't been announced yet in all the Coral magazines and things like that, but it will be, and we have about 15 of them that are the size of a pinky fingernail. So we'll get some pictures of them developed in the next month, and they look real strong. We have 3 batches of them. So this is an angelfish. This is a small candy hogfish, and this is from the Caribbean, and harlequin bass is what it's called. So freshwater ornamentals, they typically don't do them in tanks. They do, but they do them in small ponds. And there's lots of different species. There's at least 400 varieties in Florida that are available all the time. There's at least 800 total that are available at some point in time. They lay eggs. They can be live bearers, and lots of different species and reproductions. There's different systems that they use. And then this is a big freshwater ornamental operation where there's little ponds. They dig a hole and fills up with water outside of the Tampa area. And so they don't have to pump in the water. It comes right out. It's called, it just fills up naturally when you dig a hole. So they raise all the ornamentals in that. And the reason they do it is because you have this magic town in Florida called Frostproof. Okay? A little town by Orlando called Frostproof. And anything below there, you never freeze. Well, we know that's not true, but it's probably about once every 20 years or something. So anyway, that's why there's a large concentration of the farms there. There's several hundred of them in that area. And another reason is because they ship them out with airplanes, and they have Orlando and Tampa airports, and they ship out these boxes all over the world for all these different freshwater ornamentals. There's a Center for Conservation in the Tampa area. This is what it looks like. This is a new marine enhancement, big hatchery for redfish. They have all different types of things. And they do also corals and looking at different ways of fragmenting corals and then getting them to grow and then outplanting them and putting them back out. Another was a diadema. This is an urchin, a long-spined urchin. Very important in the Caribbean. It's one of the #1 organisms that cleans the reef of algae. And there's been huge die-offs for really an unknown reason. It might have been bacteria, viral, there's a debate. but a huge number of these died off, like the majority of them. And it's occurred a couple times, and they raised them. And so what they're doing now is they're raising them to outplant them, or raising them in tanks and putting them back out to let them reproduce in the wild, to increase the numbers of them. Critical for keeping the Caribbean reefs from being covered in algae. And it's quite a process to do. All different stages. This is some of them as they're growing. It's pretty cool, all these little different larval stages of them. Bay scallops, there was some areas that were very low on them, so they did release of those out to let them regenerate. This is another oyster reef way, taking these chunks of bags full of old oyster shells. They take them from restaurants, they let them sit out for a little while and sunbake, so all of the smell goes away, and then they put them in bags, and you can volunteer locally and you can go out and put these out. This is how they rebuilt Apalachicola Bay's populations. They put them back out there and gave them environments for the oysters to colonize. There's different types of stock enhancement efforts, all right? So sea ranching is one. You stock and then you harvest. My brother lives in Alaska, okay? And he is all about wild bowling. He's kind of against aquaculture production, but I've convinced him some, but he still says, no, Alaska wild caught. All right, well, you know that more than half of what you catch wild in Alaska is raised to that size and let go on a river that goes out and then it's placed into the wild harvest after it's been out to sea for 2 or 3 years. So they spawn on a river, they go offshore, they live 3 years, and they come back in and they spawn in the same place they were born, and then they die. And so that's what occurs. So my brother's like, okay, well, they release millions of little fish in a certain area, and they go out and then they're harvested. And so they play a very important, aquaculture plays a very important part in the wild. They're still getting all the wild food and everything versus cages. So that's important. Stock enhancement. We talked about the long spine urchins. There's not enough. We're going to enhance the natural population. Restocking efforts. A huge die-off occurs, and you can put more out. Supplementation, you can reduce the extinction risk, and reintroduction, big historical changes. You might have to bring those organisms back. So aquaculture works in all of them. So Texas started many years ago to raising redfish, and now it's the #1 coast for catching red drum. And they've been releasing as many as 25 million juveniles every year. And Florida is behind. We haven't been releasing as many, but this is the #1 fishery area. So they also have some salt water inland and low salinity salt water, and they are raising red drum, and they sell 5 to 6 million pounds a year easily that they raise in inland pond low salinity within Texas. And when you go to restaurants and you eat them, it's not necessarily wild caught. It's probably coming from Texas. So anyway, that shows what it is. And this is an indoor facility. It's kind of blurry, but that's where they raise them, and then they put the little ones out. Florida's done the same thing. I showed you a picture earlier of, and I said, this is the new building. So they've been doing it since 1988, but they've only released like 6 million, and they're not doing 25 million per year, but that's the goal, and they're building additional facilities now. And this is the old hatchery. So there you go. Did you learn something about aquaculture?
Yeah.
All right. Any questions?
First, water coming. You said it's most of it's coming up. What about droughts and things?
So the one that comes up is in Tampa area, and it's called a water table pond. I can't think of it, and that's what it's called. So in that area, the water is very shallow. Locally here, when it's wet, if I dig a hole in my yard to plant a tree, it's probably going to fill up with water, and that's what it does there. And so all of that water comes from somewhere else up north. It comes in like in the springs, and so the fresh water comes in a different path, but it's in the soils, and that's how they use that. It's the same as getting a well, but in the Tampa area, it's very shallow. They don't have to go deep to pump it in.
And in drought conditions?
Drought conditions haven't really affected it much, other than high evaporation during the summers. Yeah, and then the springs are pretty consistent. And I'm not an expert on all the springs in Florida, but from what I understand, most of it comes from the Appalachia mountains, and it comes down underground, and somehow it comes back up and percolates into Florida. So a constant supply is coming from somewhere else. It's not necessarily from Florida. Yeah.
Curious about the striped hybrid bass. Is it marketed as under a different name? You go to restaurants sometimes and you get a grouper for cheaper than what a grouper should be. And
Right.
just thinking
No, it's not. It's a large amount of it is sold live, and they do process it, and they actually don't do a lot of processing. So most of the farms will harvest them, put them a whole fish in a styrofoam box with ice, and send it directly to a restaurant. And someone is being the middleman involved in it and tells this restaurant wants this and this restaurant wants this, and they send those fresh on ice and they fillet it right there, so they're not processing. Taking a processing plant, giving you a frozen catfish fillet takes huge processing facilities like in Mississippi. They are not adapted for hybrid striped bass. So they sell those fresh on ice or they sell them live, and they get a premium price, mostly Asian markets, and they go and they're held in an aquarium, and they go to Philadelphia, Toronto, Ontario, New York City, Chicago, large cities, larger Asian population goes straight to those markets for their live haul and gets a premium price. Also for largemouth bass. Largemouth bass is commonly eaten in those areas, and they just opened up Florida for raising largemouth bass for food purposes. They've always been rules against it because it's sacred and we don't want to hurt our largemouth bass, but our native ones. So anyway, they have opened that up as well, and there will be producers. It's just a recent thing in the last year, so they'll start to be more producers of largemouth bass. Up north, it's very commonly to raise those and live haul those. And tilapia as well. They come down and take tilapia, and we'll live haul those to those markets. Someone comes down in an 18-wheel truck, takes them, live hauls them, drives all the way back to New York City, gets a premium price for them, and they're making money on that transport and keeping them alive. Yes.
Is any severe weather?
Does it affect these?
Well, what happens, I guess?
Well, I don't think a hurricane is good for some of those oyster floating cages. So that way, that's not good. And they saw those coming, and hopefully they got most of them out of the way. It was inevitable that they lost some of those. Even the bags laying on the bottom tended to shift around and get covered, and it was very devastating. Those two hurricanes this year for the oyster and the clam operations on the west coast of Florida. Cages. Those big ocean spars, they just drop them down. Hurricane will go right over the top. Some of the surface ones you have to watch more. Any of these tropical fish, you have to watch them by cold temperature snaps. Yep. Anything else? Yes.
So I was noticing you were talking about hatchery stocking of wild populations.
Yes.
So if somebody were catching that and sending it to market, could that be labeled as a wild fish? You know, as wild caught? I wonder about some of the labeling that we see that says wild caught, and I always think, maybe I don't know, you know?
So you mean culturing something, releasing it out, and then having that come back as wild caught? Yeah, I think that does occur, and it is wild caught if it's cultured like a salmon, and you're releasing something this big in a river, and it makes its way out, and it goes and feeds for 3 years, and then comes back to spawn because it's implanted in that area. But on the way back in, you start catching those with nets, and then you harvest them. Some won't come back in and spawn, that type of thing. So that is a wild caught, even though it was born in a hatchery. Yeah, because it has been feeding in the wild environment and harvested. Supplementing. My brother didn't like that from Alaska, but there's a big number of them that they released to make that fishery as good as it is.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
Quickly. So one of the things that I've always heard is an argument against aquaculture, or, you know, not alcohol, supplementing the wild stock is, you know, reducing genetic diversity or introducing a or something that's not very, you know, competitive. What are your thoughts about that?
So all of the operations I know of are taking genetics from the local area and are reproducing those fish. And so those are then the ones that are released in that area. They're not taking genetics from some other state and bringing them over there. Now, Washington is interesting with salmon because it's an Atlantic salmon that they're culturing, and they're in cages. And there is some debate about that. But salmon do the same thing. They come back and they migrate into a river to reproduce. So these aren't implanted there. They don't know where to go. So if there is release, those fish are somewhat lost and there's not reproduction. They're also raising a lot of Atlantic salmon off the Chile coast in South America. Big operations, and it's an Atlantic species as well because that's the one that grows real well and is the best for aquaculture purposes. But there hasn't been any sort of natural reproduction occurring. You might have some that are swimming around, but that is watched very closely. But that is one of them that there's some controversy on. You're taking an Atlantic species and you're putting it in the Pacific. But think about the reproduction. It has to go back and implant to a certain place. And so it's not one that is very likely to ever be established. Doesn't mean it's not going to be swimming around out there, but you try with everything you can to not let them escape. But if there is escapes, they're likely not going to be reproduced. So that is one of the things about the Atlantic salmon. So there's lots of questions about that. That's one of the only ones that I know that doesn't keep the local genetics of releasing fish. But they're not purposely releasing those fish if they're getting out from the cages. Yes. Anything else?
What are the 3 copepods that you raised? And 2-part question. And which is the one you would likely use for reducing?
So we have raised Apocyclops, Panamensis, great species, perfect size. We've done Pseudodioptimus. There's several in that genus. Great species. It's a little bit larger, and the main one we use is Parvocalinus crassorostrus. And that is the one that has emerged in most of the ornamental work because it's about 20% smaller on the monoculi than all the others. And it gives those little tiny larvae a little bit advantage on catching those. And they're all highly nutritious. Another thing about copepods, some of our research years ago, we need these heart healthy, this is fascinating, you need these heart healthy fatty acids. We have to have our fish oils and we have to have that for our heart. So in the wild, they come from the algae originally. But how do they get within the product that we're eating, fish? And we've now found that you have to go through what's called elongation and desaturation of those fatty acids to get these healthy, long DHA and EPA chains. That doesn't naturally occur unless it's eaten. So what happens now, we've identified as the copepods are the ones that do that. The little tiny crustacean takes the algae, takes the fatty acids, and makes it exactly what it needs to feed that larval fish, and then be consumed by the next fish, to be consumed by the next fish, and it accumulates within there, and it all starts in the algae. Thus, the copepod then enters the food chain. So the copepod makes it into those long-chain fatty acids. So where are we getting our good, healthy fatty acids? On the majority of our ocean fishes, it starts with the copepod stage.
Oh.
Yeah.
And you said they were 30 microns.
30 microns wide and maybe 60 microns long. The larval fish is 1.6 millimeters or something like that. 1.7, they're tiny. Some of the larger ones that I sent around there are probably closer to 2 millimeters. Something like that. And that's probably the size of them. As big as the majority of the fish around here get when they're spawning. Those really small ones are more potentially the small ornamentals.
So our team are super easy to culture. That's one of the reasons it was foods.
Correct.
However, the copepods in terms of culturing.
So we started working with them 15 years ago, and we didn't really know the methods. Now we've very dialed in on the methods. My lab and the other lab in Ruskin and University of Hawaii has done the majority of the work on it in the United States. There's also some labs in the Northeast that have worked with them, different species. Worldwide, I don't think we've really raised more than 20. And there's 12,000 known, probably more than that. We're raising ones that we have the methods for. And the trick of them is you can raise them and you can get them to reproduce. But these are tiny shrimp, and just as any other shrimp, they go through what's called density-dependent reproduction and density-dependent growth. If there's too many of them, they don't grow. If there's too many of them, they won't reproduce. And so what we do is we have systems engineered with a screen that's 35 microns, and we turn a pump on, and all the babies, the inoculi, go through each day and then collect those in a bucket. All the parents get left behind, and the parents say, well, there's no babies, so I'm going to make more. And so they make more babies every single day. And so we fool the system, and they go up in population. The adults live probably a month, but after about 2 weeks of reproduction, it goes up and it goes down. So once it hits that peak and it's coming down, we're done with that tank, and we have the next one coming up. And so we take a population of inoculi and keep it in a smaller tank and feed them for a few days until they're ready to go, and then we just switch out the adult population. But that's the way we do it, because we trick them on the density-dependent reproduction. When we take the babies out every single day, if you leave them in one day, then the screens are too big, the inoculi have grown, and then it'll throw the whole thing off. That tank's useless. So that's how we do it. And coming up with those methods and figuring that out has really worked really well. So we have it well dialed in. And everybody was always like, this is too expensive, this is too expensive. And we did workshops and taught producers how to do it. And I think the majority of marine ornamental, all the marine ornamental producers I know in the country now do it, and many of the others do it as well. Even if you're just feeding them for a few days, it's still advantageous to relate a rotifer. If you can raise them on a rotifer, it's easy. A rotifer doesn't have much nutritional value. It's about the same size as one of these inoculi copepods, but it doesn't have as much nutrition. So all these products are commercially available. They're a mix of algae and nutrients, and you feed it to them and you pack its gut, and then you feed it to them. So basically what you're doing is you're using it as a delivery mechanism where you give them something and those rotifers eat it, and then you give it immediately to the fish larvae. And a copepod is naturally perfect nutrition. So that's the difference on it. And a rotifer is inexpensive, it's easy to raise, so it works as some of the food, but copepods is certainly not as expensive as people initially thought once we had some method style agriculture.
Is there
Yes.
any negative effect, like the big footprint of the fast growing of agriculture for coastal ecosystem health? Like, is that something we need to worry about?
For fish health or?
No, for the magnet, for the coastal
Oh, okay.
coastal areas. Like if it is growing, facilities are growing all the way.
So it comes about discharge and on these open ocean cages that you see there's a lot of pellets going in those on a daily basis. It's huge fish within there. You have cobia this big growing and they're eating a pelleted food. And they don't site those somewhere shallow with not much current. They won't allow it. And lots of them, there's 8 of them in a row in Panama that are huge and have 500,000 pounds of fish in each one of them. And the nutrients disperse and aren't accumulating in that particular area. So even those using that large amount of pelleted feed within that cage, they didn't site it in a bay where it's going to cause a problem. And remember the salmon, same thing. I told you they put it in a bay with high tidal. So every 12 hours it comes in and out. And the nutrients don't accumulate. So it's kind of siting of where you put those operations so it doesn't cause damage. And I would say everywhere in the world is very conscious of this. So I think that some areas that had mangrove issues in the past have planted millions of acres of mangroves to protect the coast and now handle all the water differently. And any of those issues from a long time ago don't exist the same way. So it's very conscious that we're trying to keep the environment surrounding. So, all right. So what percentage of the world's seafood today is farm raised?
50%.
Where does it need to be in 2050? 75%. And that's if our ocean stays exactly the same. So, hey, anything else?
Thank you.
Points. I always like, everybody's like, oh, I see everybody's face changes, they're looking at this, they're like learning something. See that, so that's good. Any other questions? Your own question? More questions? Okay, all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.